Have you ever stopped to consider that within every religious institution, behind every pulpit and established doctrine, there exists a truth so profound, so liberating, that the very guardians of dogma fear revealing it? Watchman Nee uncovered something that Western Christian tradition attempted to bury for centuries, not because it was false, but because it was far too dangerous for power structures that feed on spiritual control. Jesus whispered to his disciples truths that challenged the institutionalized religion of his time, truths that awakened the inner man, that dormant spirit dwelling within you, that no one ever taught you to access. If the religion you know has never freed you, if it merely imprisoned you in empty rituals and perpetual guilt, it's because you still don't understand the difference between believing with your mind and living with your spirit, between obeying dead rules and experiencing the living resurrection of Christ operating within you. In this video, we will explore 3 profound teachings that will completely transform your understanding of who you truly are and what spiritual power sleeps in the depths of your being, waiting only for awakening through the truth that Jesus shared and that Watchman Nee devoted his life to recovering. Prepare yourself, because once you see the truth, it is impossible to return to illusion. The greatest tragedy of modern Christianity is not that people stopped believing in God, but that they learned to believe in institutions instead. Watchman Nee recognized this tragedy with piercing clarity. He saw how centuries of religious structure had calcified around living truth, like sediment covering a buried treasure. The churches grew larger, their doctrines became more complex, their ceremonies more elaborate, and yet something vital was missing from the spiritual experience of countless millions. Men and women occupied pews every Sunday, murmured prayers prescribed by centuries of tradition, sang hymns written in languages their hearts no longer understood, and returned home feeling the same emptiness with which they arrived. This is not faith. This is performance. This is the theater of religion masquerading as the reality of encounter with the divine. What Watchman Nee discovered, and what Jesus desperately tried to communicate through every parable and every confrontation with religious authorities, is that the kingdom of heaven does not exist in external structures, but in the sanctuary most profound of your spirit. When he spoke to Nicodemus about being born again, he was not describing a doctrinal position you could memorize. He was pointing to a radical transformation of consciousness, a death and resurrection that happens at the deepest level of your being. The Pharisees heard these words too, but could not comprehend them because they spent their entire lives perfecting the external facade, while allowing the internal reality to wither. They became experts in the letter while remaining blind to the spirit. And this same blindness has persisted through the centuries, passed down through denominations and traditions like spiritual poison masked as sacred heritage. But here is what religion never taught you. The human spirit is not dormant by accident. It is not underdeveloped because God designed you that way. You were created with infinite spiritual capacity, a profound connection with the divine that should have been awakened, cultivated, and lived in every moment of your existence. Instead, you were told to believe certain things, follow certain rules, and trust that this mechanical obedience would translate into genuine transformation. You learned to pray with your lips while your spirit remained silent. You learned to fear God with your intellect while your deepest being remained untouched by His presence. This is the prison that Watchman Nee spent his entire life exposing, not with anger, but with the tenderness of someone who had escaped and could not bear to see others remain imprisoned. The fundamental problem is not theological. It is perceptual. You were taught to experience spirituality through the medium of institutional mediation, a priest, a pastor, a doctrine, a ritual, when Jesus came specifically to abolish all intermediaries between you and the Father. He tore the veil of the temple not as a symbol, but as a declaration. Direct access to the presence of God is now the birthright of every human being. But somewhere along the way the veil was reconstructed, not in stone and fabric but in tradition and fear. You were convinced that your direct experience with God was somehow dangerous, heretical, or too intimate for the common person to bear. And so generations learned to subordinate their deepest encounter with the divine to the interpretations of those positioned as authorities, creating a spiritual distance between you and the very presence that yearns to touch the deepest recesses of your consciousness. The revolutionary vision of Watchman Nee was this: the vital teachings of Jesus are often neglected, not because they are secret doctrines locked away in forbidden texts, but because they are invisible to the carnal mind, the mind dominated by external facts, social conditioning, and compliance based on fear. They are before us, incorporated in every passage of the gospel, whispered through every parable, and demonstrated in every miracle. They were never meant to be ignored. They were meant to be discovered through direct spiritual perception. What you are about to learn are not new concepts invented by human philosophy. They are the eternal truths that have been waiting inside the text of Scripture, and more importantly, waiting inside your own transformed spirit for 2,000 years. The first teaching concerns something so fundamental, so revolutionary, that understanding it alone could destroy all the limiting beliefs you hold about your own spiritual identity. Jesus did not come primarily to create a new religion with rules and regulations. He came to birth a new humanity, a species of being where the inner man is awakened, strengthened, and brought into glorious resurrection. When he rose from the dead on the third day, he was not merely validating a theological doctrine. He was demonstrating the ultimate destiny of your deepest being. This is what Watchman Nee understood with absolute clarity. The resurrection of Christ is not a historical event you store in your memory. It is an event that must occur continuously, perpetually in the depths of your spirit, until it becomes the normal rhythm of your existence. Most Christians have never understood what it means that you have been raised together with Christ and seated in heavenly places. These are not poetic descriptions meant to inspire you with vague hope. They are descriptions of your genuine present reality. This is happening now, this very moment. Your inner man, that deepest dimension of your being where you encounter truth directly, where you experience meaning without external validation, where you touch the infinite, is already seated in divine reality. But you remain unconscious of it. You continue to live from the surface levels of your personality, your emotions, your acquired conditioning, while the power of Christ's resurrection is actively operating in realms of your being you have never learned to access. The tragedy is that you are already free, already transformed, already positioned in heavenly authority, and yet you continue to live as a prisoner. How does this change? First, you must understand that the outer man, your personality, your social identity, your collection of learned behaviors and defensive mechanisms must undergo continuous death. This is not morbid or negative. This is the most liberating truth you could ever encounter. When Jesus said, "Take up your cross daily and follow me," he was describing the daily mortification of the external self so that the inner man can emerge in ever greater glory. Most Christians hear this and assume it means suffering, self-punishment, or joyless asceticism. This is the demonic distortion of truth. The cross is not punishment. The cross is passage. It is the door through which the limited being dies and the infinite being is born. Each time you release your need to be right, to be seen, to be validated by others, to control your circumstances, in that moment, your inner man gains ground, strength, freedom. Watchman Nee described this process using a profound metaphor. The inner man grows as the outer man decreases. This is not symbolic poetry. These are literal spiritual mechanics. Consider a muscle that has never been used. It remains weak, atrophied, almost non-functional. Now consider that your spirit, your deepest faculty for perceiving and experiencing truth, has been dormant throughout your entire life, strangled by the demands of maintaining your personality, managing your social image, and complying with external structures. What would happen if you began, consciously and deliberately, to exercise your inner man? What if you spent time in radical honesty with yourself, looking directly at your own patterns, your own fears, your own defenses, without judgment, but with complete perception? In that state of brutal honesty, your inner man begins to strengthen. You begin to feel a different quality of presence, a different texture of consciousness, a different level of reality becoming available to you. This resurrected inner man operates from principles completely foreign to the logic of the external world. He does not compete because he has nothing to prove. He does not hoard because he has recognized his fundamental security in eternal realities. He does not manipulate because he has abandoned the illusion that he needs to control anything. He does not fear rejection because he has died to the need for external validation. He moves through the world with a quality of presence that is absolutely arresting, absolutely magnetic, absolutely different from the anxious striving of the death-dominated outer man. This is the first teaching. Your resurrection is not a future event. It is a present possibility waiting to be actualized through your daily, moment-by-moment choice to let the outer man decrease, so the inner man can emerge in ever-increasing fullness. The second teaching addresses the most fundamental problem preventing you from recognizing the reality that Watchman Nee is trying to communicate. You have been trained, conditioned, and refined into spiritual blindness. Your perceptual faculties have been so colonized by messages from the external world that you can no longer see the invisible realities that are more real than anything your five senses can detect. This is not a personal failure. It is the systematic effect of living in a culture of materialism, rationalism, and institutional control. You have been hypnotized into believing that only what can be measured, quantified, and verified through external authority is genuinely real. Everything else, your intuition, your direct perception of truth, your deepest knowing, has been relegated to the status of subjective opinion and unreliable fantasy. Jesus spent an enormous amount of his teaching time trying to train his disciples to see beyond the visible world into the underlying spiritual realities that give birth to and govern the visible world. He who has ears to hear, let him hear, he would say, not because his disciples lacked physical ears, but because their spiritual perception was obscured. The Pharisees mastered every external law, accumulated every doctrinal detail, and perfected every ritual protocol. And yet Jesus looked at them and said they were blind guides. They could not perceive the presence of God standing directly before them. How is this possible? Because spiritual perception cannot be developed through intellect alone. It cannot be learned from a book. It cannot be obtained through compliance with external rules. It requires a complete recalibration of how you process reality itself. Watchman Nee called this recalibration the recovery of the spirit-dominated life. He recognized that in the history of Christianity, a catastrophic shift had occurred. Believers had gradually transferred their authority of perception from their inner spiritual faculty to their outer intellectual faculty. Theology replaced revelation. Doctrine replaced direct encounter. The mind, which is a magnificent tool for organizing external information, had been installed as the ultimate arbiter of truth. And the spirit, that faculty capable of perceiving the invisible kingdom, of knowing God directly, of distinguishing the counterfeit from the authentic with absolute clarity, had been relegated to the basement, considered dangerous and unreliable. This inversion is the root cause of every form of spiritual imprisonment you experience. But here is the revolutionary truth. Your spirit is not dangerous. It is the only reliable guide you actually possess. Your intellect can be deceived. Your emotions can mislead you. Your senses can trick you. Your social conditioning can manipulate you. But your true inner spirit, the part of you most intimately connected with the eternal, has an absolute and infallible capacity to discern truth from falsehood. When Jesus said the Holy Spirit will guide you into all truth, he was not describing an external force imposing doctrine into your mind. He was describing an awakening of your deepest faculty to perceive what is already true, what is already present, what has already been accomplished. This is the recovery that Watchman Nee devoted his life to facilitating, teaching people how to trust their spiritual perception again, how to rebuild the authority of their inner knowing. So how does this reconstruction begin? First, you must recognize the prison, become aware of the perceptual prison you have inherited. Notice how much of your decision-making is driven by fear of what others might think, by desire for external validation, by compulsion to comply with inherited rules. Notice how often you override your own direct knowing in deference to what you have been taught to believe is true. Notice the constant background anxiety that comes from living disconnected from your own deepest reality. In the moment you truly see this prison, something extraordinary happens. The prison begins to lose its power. This is not because the prison walls suddenly become weaker. It is because you have begun to operate from a different level of consciousness. You have begun, even slightly, to rebuild the authority of your own spiritual perception, and in that moment, all the teaching becomes available to you. The third teaching is perhaps the most radical and most dangerous to every structure of institutional control. Jesus taught it through parables and primarily shared it only with his most intimate disciples. This teaching concerns the absolute and complete authority that is granted to the spiritually mature, authority not granted by external institutions but conferred by the development of your inner man into fullness. When your inner spirit has matured sufficiently, when you have learned to perceive truth directly, when you have died adequately to the demands of your external self, something extraordinary occurs. You gain authority that institutional religion trembles to acknowledge. This authority is not authority over others. It is authority over your own destiny, your own spiritual reality, and ultimately, over the invisible forces that attempt to govern the visible world. Watchman Nee pointed to the example of Jesus himself. Nowhere in Scripture is he ordained by the Pharisees or given credentials by the religious authorities. He never attended their schools or received their approval. And yet his authority was absolute, not because of institutional position, but because of spiritual maturity. When he spoke, demons obeyed. When he commanded, the forces of nature responded. When he proclaimed truth, it shattered the limitations that institutionally imposed beliefs had created. This is not a supernatural gift granted only to a few. It is the inevitable result of spiritual development. As your inner man matures, as you learn to operate from your deepest reality rather than from your superficial conditioned self, you discover that you possess capacities you never knew existed. You find that your words carry weight. Your decisions create effects. Your mere presence can shift the consciousness of those around you. This is not ego inflation. It is the honest recognition of the natural authority that belongs to the spiritually developed. But here is where institutional religion becomes particularly threatened. Once people recognize their own spiritual authority, once they discover they can perceive truth directly without needing an intermediary, once they realize that their own spiritual maturity is valid and authoritative, the entire structure of religious control begins to crumble. This is why the Pharisees were so determined to eliminate Jesus. It was not primarily his miracles that threatened them, it was his authority. He was teaching ordinary people that they possessed access to God that did not require priestly mediation, spiritual authority that did not depend on religious credentials, transformation that could occur through direct encounter rather than institutional compliance. This was existentially threatening to the entire religious establishment of his time, and it remains threatening to any institution that depends on your continued belief in your own spiritual incompetence. The maturity to which you are being invited is not something mysterious or difficult to define. It consists of several observable characteristics. First, the mature spirit has learned to distinguish between the eternal and the temporal, between what matters and what merely appears to matter. He is no longer susceptible to the manipulations that work so effectively on those still trapped in external consciousness. Second, the mature spirit operates from a place of such profound security in the eternal that he is absolutely free to abandon the strategies of the small self, the pursuit of power, the accumulation of resources, the cultivation of image. He is free to love generously, speak truth, act with integrity, without calculating advantage or protecting position. Third, the mature spirit has learned that reality operates through principles completely different from those taught by the world. What the world calls weakness is power. What the world calls death is resurrection. What the world calls loss is gain. Here is where the three teachings converge: your inner man, when resurrected, and when your perception is reconstructed to perceive truth directly, matures into a being who operates from genuine authority, not authority seized through force or granted by institutions, but authority that is simply the natural expression of spiritual development. Jesus promised that those who believed in him would do greater works than these because he was going to the Father. This is not a promise to a few elite disciples. This is a promise to the ordinary person who is willing to make the journey from spiritual death to resurrection, from perceptual blindness to direct perception, from inherited authority to authentic maturity. And this is what terrifies every attempt to keep you in spiritual imprisonment. Because once you taste genuine authority, the authority of your own resurrected inner man, you will never again accept the counterfeit authority of institutional manipulation. You have now encountered the three teachings that Jesus shared with such care, and that Watchman Nee risked everything to recover and communicate to a world still living in spiritual darkness. These are not new concepts you have discovered. They are ancient truths that have been neglected under centuries of religious debris, truths that have been waiting inside the text of Scripture and inside your own deepest being, waiting for the moment when you would be ready to perceive them. But here is the most crucial and most dangerous aspect of this revelation: knowledge alone changes nothing. These three teachings, the resurrection of your inner man, the recovery of your spiritual perception, and the authority that naturally flows from spiritual maturity, will remain abstractions, beautiful ideas disconnected from your lived experience, unless you make a profound commitment to actualization. You are standing at a threshold. What you choose in the next few moments will determine whether this teaching becomes the catalyst for your total transformation or remains another inspirational message you will forget by tomorrow. Watchman Nee witnessed thousands of believers who heard the truth, resonated with it emotionally, felt the stirring of something deeper within themselves, and then returned to their lives unchanged. Why? Because they did not understand that truth is not passive knowledge. It is an active principle that demands engagement. The moment you perceive truth, you face a choice: will you adjust your entire being to align with what you now see, or will you retreat back into the comfortable prison of your familiar patterns? There is no neutral ground. The moment you glimpse your spiritual imprisonment, continuing to live within it requires active denial. You cannot unknow what you now know. And this creates an internal tension that will either catalyze your transformation or become a source of perpetual frustration. The choice is not whether you will be uncomfortable. The choice is whether your discomfort will drive you toward liberation, or whether you will add the pain of denied truth to your existing burdens. So what does commitment to this transformation actually require? First, it requires that you cease, immediately and absolutely, seeking validation for your spiritual intuitions from the external authorities who have a vested interest in your continued limitation. Stop asking permission from institutions, denominations, and the voices of inherited tradition for the truths your inner spirit already knows. This does not mean rejecting all external input. It means reversing the authority structure. Instead of letting external authorities determine what is true and then asking your inner spirit to conform, let your inner spirit be the authority and use external sources as tools to support and clarify what you already perceive. Second, it requires that you begin, today, the daily practice of listening to your inner man. This means creating spaces, perhaps silence, perhaps meditation, perhaps reflective writing, perhaps contemplation, where you are not speaking, not consuming, not performing, but simply present to the deeper dimensions of your own being. Third, this transformation requires that you practice, daily and continuously, the death of your small self in concrete and specific ways. Do not wait until you feel ready to release your need for control, because you will never feel ready. Begin now. The next time you are about to speak in order to maintain your image, remain silent instead. The next time you are about to grasp for advantage, practice open-handed generosity instead. The next time you are afraid and begin to construct defensive strategies, consciously surrender into that fear and discover that you do not die. Each of these small deaths is a workout that strengthens your inner man and weakens the tyranny of your conditioned self. Over weeks and months, these small practices accumulate into a total reconstruction of your consciousness. You begin to live from your deepest reality rather than from your superficial conditioning. You begin to perceive truth directly rather than through the filter of others' interpretations. And you begin to discover that you possess authority you never imagined. Finally, and this is absolutely essential, understand that this journey is not an escape from the world or a retreat into private spiritual experience. The resurrection of Jesus was not a private event. It was a cosmic proclamation that death itself has been defeated, that reality has been fundamentally reorganized, that a completely new way of being is now possible for all of humanity. Your inner resurrection is not meant for your private comfort. It is meant to become a living witness in this world. As you develop your spiritual authority, you will discover that your mere presence begins to awaken dormant potential in others. Your words begin to carry a different quality. Your choices begin to cascade into effects you never planned. This is not because you have become special. It is because you have become real. You have become aligned with what has always been true. And in a world drowning in falsity, manufactured personas, and defensive masks, a single genuine human being becomes absolutely revolutionary. You are being invited into this revolution. The three teachings are calling you to your resurrection. The only question that remains is, will you answer? You are standing at a crossroads that most never recognize, between continuing asleep in the comfort of what you have always known and awakening to a reality that demands everything from you. Watchman Nee did not merely describe this journey, he lived it, paying an extraordinary price so that you could one day receive what he rescued from the ruins of forgotten tradition. The three teachings you have heard today are not information you can simply store away and move on. They are seeds planted in fertile soil, and from this moment forward, your consciousness cannot ignore what you have seen. You know the truth about your own potential, about the authority that sleeps in your spirit, about the resurrection that awaits you. And knowing truth creates a responsibility that cannot be undone, the responsibility to choose. This is the moment that defines everything. Not tomorrow, not when you feel more prepared, not when circumstances become perfect. Now, because the life you truly want to live, that life of genuine freedom, authentic authority, and continuous resurrection, does not belong to the future. It is waiting to be lived in the present. If this message touched something in you, I need you to leave a comment with just one word. What was the truth that resonated most in your heart? Write resurrection. If you felt the awakening of your inner man, write freedom. If you recognized the prison you have lived in, write transformation. If you are ready for change, or choose the word that best expresses your moment right now. Your comments are not just numbers, they are the living testimony of those who are truly awakening. Subscribe to the channel because many more teachings will come, teachings that will continue to rebuild your perception and strengthen your inner man. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this, because in sharing, you do not merely offer truth, you commit yourself even more fully to your own transformation. This is not just watching a video, it is taking the first step back home.